Our subscribers get it, with exclusive access to breaking news, briefs, reactions, opinion, and process. iPolitics. Are you up for it?
Okay, good afternoon. My name is BJ Sikierski. I'm a reporter with iPolitics. I'm joined here today by three very knowledgeable guests to discuss the almost completed comprehensive economic and trade agreement Canada has signed with the EU. To my left, I have Jean-Michel Lorrain, who is now with Octane Strategies, but was formerly with the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters as the Vice President of Global Business Policy. I think that was the correct title. Yeah. Beside Jean-Michel, we have Laura Dawson of Dawson Strategic, who has extensive expertise in trade policy and actually used to teach it here at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton.
I did, yes.
And finally, we have Paul Benoit, last but not least, currently with Hill & Knowlton, but not too far removed from being a senior advisor to the Minister of International Trade. That's correct. Okay, so getting started here, I said almost completed because there are still some things to sort out. We had Steve Verhoeven, the chief negotiator for Canada, at Trade Committee yesterday, and he said, it could be a few more months till the text is actually done. But he also said this is unprecedented to release this much information before the text comes out. So I thought, Paul, you might be able to start us off. Is it strange and to go about it this way?
Well, we're breaking a lot of new ground with this agreement, BJ, but I think it's quite reasonable that we've done what we've done. I think Canadians will be able to get a sense of what I'd call the sort of scope and depth of the agreement. We haven't heard very much about it. What's been unusual for the last 4 years is how little it's been discussed in the media. And so long before this legal scrubbing, which always takes a long time, there'll be a ratification process. Provinces are involved as well. So I think it's a very good idea of the government to give us an idea. If you're a particular industry in a particular sector already established, of course some of those details are important.
Sure.
But for most businesses, from an opportunity point of view, from policy perspective, I think it's excellent that the government has released what it has.
And Laura?
I think because we've been in the negotiations for such a long time, there was a lot of expectations that we would be hearing something. Actually, I think the business community was hoping for something sooner. Also, politically, the government has staked a lot on this agreement, and so years of silence have not been particularly helpful. Also, even once the negotiations are complete, the legal scrub, the translation, the implementation process is going to take a long time as well. So they needed to get something out there in order to maintain momentum.
Mm-hmm. Jean-Michel, having dealt with the business community for so long, how important do you think it was for them to get this idea now, not to wait a few more months?
Well, it's helpful because, for business, I know many of them are trying to incorporate the agreement into their strategic planning decisions, especially companies that operate not just in Canada but in other countries. Obviously, there are some Canadian companies that see this as an opportunity to try to get more investment from their headquarters in Europe or in the United States or elsewhere around the planet. So they're trying to figure out, well, what are the specifics of this agreement that I can use? And so, not just the tariff changes that are going to come into effect, but also like all the other aspects of the agreement that we've talked about. I think the other thing that businesses are trying to figure out, and we're getting a better sense of that, is like when is the agreement actually going to be implemented? We are hearing that some parts might be provisionally applied even before the agreement is actually ratified by the provinces and the federal government, by the member states in Europe. So it's going to be interesting to see how that happens. But companies, it's good that the government has been able to sort of release as much information as they can release, even though the final text is not yet ready.
Sure. Getting into the nuts and bolts of what we do have out. Part of the government's messaging on this has been some of our industries that are going to be facing stiffer competition. Don't particularly like that. I'm thinking the dairy farmers, the automobile manufacturers have also gotten significant access into the biggest market in the world. On the dairy side, you have them saying, well, we have such a huge amount of subsidy coming from the common agricultural policy in the EU that we can't possibly take advantage of that. Automobile manufacturers aren't exporting that much to Europe right now. Is it reasonable to expect them to be able to take advantage of this new market access, or is it, I guess for a lack of a better word, a bit of a facade?
I think, BJ, that we're so tempted always to focus on the few players that are always very active and present in the public debates. There are a lot of other businesses, I think, and that's where the opportunities is. This is an agreement, a framework that's going to provide opportunities for a lot of different industries. It's not going to provide, though, what I would call opportunities for restructuring, major restructuring. Some of us like to think of free trade agreements as being an occasion for a restructuring, a making of one's own economy sort of more efficient through bilateral exchanges. I don't think this is really going to happen that much in this case, but it is providing a lot of opportunities. Now, where you have to look for those opportunities are not with those sectors that are the most visible and the ones you've just mentioned. I think it's a lot of other sectors. I think it's, for example, in Atlantic Canada, tremendous opportunities for people who any kind of agricultural food processing, the fish and the forestry, etc.
On that
where tariffs are
subject,
coming
we had
in.
the Premier, I'm sure you remember a few months back, not too happy about the fish processing requirements. They wanted to keep that in Canada to the largest extent possible. How do you think that'll
well, that's just it. You see, like the ones who are present and who are benefiting from the status quo, but that's a very small group of players. They're the ones who are going to be public, And I think for an informed sort of debate, we have to get beyond the few people who are very established and who have their interests and they're doing very well, thank you, and look at it as opportunities for a lot of other players. And industries that may not even considered Europe. There's a whole, what I call sort of the further distant Europe, the middle distant Europe that we really have to get into, beyond the Holland, England, and France. That's where there are tremendous opportunities, and there are a lot of Canadian companies that have a lot to bring. They're not the ones we typically know about or complain traditionally on trade agreements.
To jump on Paul's point about restructuring, the agreement is probably not on its own important enough to fundamentally restructure the way we operate in dairy and in other protected sectors, but it's definitely a sign of a trend. And through the agreement with the European Union, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, pressure from other quarters, in particular consumer pressure on the dairy industry, I think we are going to see some changes in the longer term. But as Paul says, we're hearing a lot from those who have sectors to defend and interests to defend. And in a modern commercial economy, no sector has the right to protection in perpetuity. And I think what's more important in this agreement is previous trade agreements have been about market access for big companies. This is more about reducing costs, improving transparency, improving opportunities for smaller companies. So there aren't huge walloping gains in any one aspect of this agreement, but it's indicative of gains across the board.
Sure.
I think a good trade agreement is an agreement that has very diffuse benefits across the entire economy. And I think the costs tend to be concentrated on a few sectors, and I think that's why in this case we've heard a lot more about those sectors that might have some concerns or that might see some adverse effects to this agreement. I think those companies and those sectors that stand to benefit quite a bit from the agreement, many of them have been waiting to actually see the information trickle out and understand, okay, well, what does it really mean for us? And I think as companies are figuring that out and as economic sectors are figuring that out, I think you're going to see more people come out and sort of say, well, this is actually great for us for this reason.
Something I'd like to follow up on, there's been talk of compensation for the industries affected. What do all of you make? Should there be compensation? How do we go about measuring that for the dairy farmers, for one thing? Losing this market access, how do we go about that equitably? I mean, you can take the point that this shouldn't be taking place in the first place, but it is there, and some of them have valuable assets.
It just seemed to me like that was sort of in those three areas where the federal government is promising to compensate if in the case that there are damages as we go forward years ahead. But it really looks like just to assuage any worries that particularly provinces may have had about a particular established sector, so that it's it had a political, I view that as nearly having a political role, being able to win, to bring certain people on board who may be assuaged.
Yeah, in dairy and pharma, it's going to play out differently. I think in dairy, it's you could almost put a dollar figure right away on what that would be, because you know what kind of market access
Yeah.
you're providing, you know what value the product is going to be, you know, if you look at trends and things like that. And I think the challenge we have in general with supply management is it's, you know, other countries that have subsidies, you can agree to reduce subsidies to a certain level. In our case, we've got a system that, you know, between consumers and end up paying. So I sometimes compare it to being pregnant. It's like you're pregnant or you're not. You can't say I'm going to be 20% less pregnant. So we have this system, supply management, and we've been sort of, sometimes it's kind of a straitjacket from a trade policy perspective. I think on the pharmaceutical side, it's going to take a long time to figure out, you know, what compensation would be like, because we don't, you know, depend on what drugs are put on the market by the time those patents expire.
There's really very little historic precedence for offering compensation. I mean, if we're restructuring supply management, which is not required in this agreement, we don't necessarily have to get rid of the supply managed quota system. If we're going to buy out quota, then that has a dollar value. But in the past, when people have tried to provide compensation to affected sectors, it's actually very difficult to find a cause and effect relationship. They tried to do this in the US over the NAFTA to compensate workers who'd lost their jobs as a result. They had very, very few successful claims because very few people were able to say, as a result of this and not
Proving
other
causation.
economic reasons that caused a job loss. So compensation is, you know, political talk, but not a reality.
Okay, I think we might end the first segment right there.